Yes, and one thing we used to have before the FDA got as large as it was is we did have some third-party testing, which is something we do not have today. And for example, the American Medical Association used to test drugs on their own. I'm not sure what their process was exactly, but they would then either give their seal of approval to a drug or not. And that's similar to what Underwriters Laboratory does with electrical equipment. You know, when you see that little UL on your electrical equipment, there's no law that says you can't buy electrical equipment without that UL. It's certification, not regulation. In regulation, you are forbidden to buy something without, well, in this case, FDA approval. Even if you want to, even if you think your life depends on it, you can't just go out and get the drug. You have to get the FDA's permission. And we used to have other third-party testing too. There were journals that reviewed the drugs, and there were other types of things like this evolving. And then when the FDA got its teeth, so to speak, after the thalidomide incident in the 1962 or the early 1960s, then those pretty much dried up because the FDA became the authority. So we really need to get back to third-party testing. It's the only way that we're going to get legitimate information. But as we saw during the COVID crisis, we're probably not going to get that because the US government has decided that it wants a certain narrative for drugs. And of course, that's part of a collusion. I think, John, you probably talked about this a lot in your book. I'm guessing from what you said about the interaction between government, pharma, and the medical, what they call the medical industrial complex. So, you know, without third-party testing, we really don't have good information, and we're not going to get third-party testing unless we do not have an authority like the FDA that has the ability to forbid people to take the drug that they want if they think it's going to help them. You know, if we don't have that freedom to choose, then we are not going to have third-party testing. And in fact, what's happening today is there's some consumer organizations that are trying to get a hold of the data for cancer drugs, the Abigail Alliance, for example. And they have, I think if I'm getting this number right, they have identified 40 cancer drugs that they thought should have been approved by the FDA an average of 2 years before they were approved. And so people died waiting for these drugs. And one of the people that died was Abigail, the daughter of the man who then started this organization. So if a consumer organization can do that well, identifying drugs that should have been approved, but weren't because the FDA drags its feet, because it has the power to identify winners and losers in the pharma game, then, you know, if as long as we have that, we are not going to get third-party testing, and we are not going to have the medical freedom to access what we want. And that's part of what's happening in the nutritional industry is the FDA is trying to provide or trying to impose the same regulations on nutrients that it has imposed on drugs. And because those are off patent, there's no way that those trials are going to happen because they're so expensive. So
thank you.
I'll stop there.
So let me just clarify, just to make sure I understand this. You're saying, Dr. Abramson, you said peer reviewers don't have data from manuscripts and don't have access to primary data. So what I'm trying to understand is, if there's 1 million doctors in the country taking care of 330 million Americans, and we are all assuming that when the doctor finally makes his decision on what action you should take, whether to take a drug, not to take, which one to take, that he's doing it based on data that was totally transparent and thoroughly looked at. Are you saying, or am I not understanding this? Are you saying that when my smart doctor, who I like a lot and have known for 20 years, and my friend's doctor and everyone's doctor is making a decision that they and the journal they read never actually looked at the real data, they just looked at the conclusion from what they were told? Like no one outside of the company, the drug company, actually ever looked at the real data of what the results said? And does this also go for the antidepressant and antipsychotic industry? Am I understanding this right? Can you clarify? Could you clarify that?
Yes, I'm sorry to tell you that you have it 100% correct. So I started to understand this in litigation, and I was at a conference, and there was not the editor-in-chief, but a high-ranking editor of a very prestigious journal at the conference, and we were walking out of the room together. And I said to him to really test this question that you've asked, Steve, because it's so discordant with what we believe. When drug companies do clinical trials, they prepare what's called a clinical study report. And they take the patient level data that's put in electrical data sets, and they tabulate that data into about a 3,000 page report. And for the most part, those clinical study reports accurately present the data. And any clinical trial that has any potential to be used for regulatory approval has a clinical study report. So I asked this journal editor, why don't you guys simply require that when the results of a clinical study are submitted to you, why don't you simply mandate that the authors of the journal, of the manuscript that's being submitted, have to send you the clinical study report so that you can do a quick verification of the results that are being sent in. It's not a total verification. You have to get the patient level data and get a statistician to do the analysis. But the clinical study report, you can get through pretty quickly. So I asked him this question, and before he took the next step, he answered me, we don't do that because it would create a death spiral for the journal. Meaning the companies wouldn't submit their important clinical trials if there were greater scrutiny by that journal, and the journal wouldn't make its money from selling reprints back to the drug company to hand out to the doctors, and the journal wouldn't make money because the drug company would pull its advertising. So the journal, what he was saying was two things: is yes, to your question, that's what's happening. You're a good doctor who's working as hard as he can and being as good a doc as he can be, doesn't know that he does not have access to an independent analysis of the articles that he's reading in the most trustworthy journals. He doesn't know that. And it's craziness, because the truth is that only 1 out of 4 new drugs that's approved is significantly better than older drugs. And the doctors have no way to pick that out of the bunch. No way. So we are not practicing evidence-based medicine. We are practicing non-evidence-based medicine, and the doctors have to do that. And until there's a public outcry that says we won't do it, and until the doctors say we won't pose as learned intermediaries, we refuse to be fraudulently present ourselves to our patients as learned intermediaries because we don't have access to the science, until that outcry is louder than the drug companies' money that they spend lobbying and buying politicians, we're going to have this enormously expensive healthcare system that produces far worse health than the other wealthy countries.
Just to add one thing real quickly. I'm not sure doctors actually read the journals much. I think what they really get is a summary, and they just learn.
I don't know if that's good news or bad news, Bob.
Maybe I don't even know if they read the abstracts, but anyway, there's another problem here, and I think it begins with you also get garbage in, garbage out. And you're right, they don't have access to the case report forms, but they design those case report forms with a way to look for information that will help their drugs be successful, not identify harms, that sort of thing. And then the other thing, for example, with psychiatric drugs, I mean, we have to look at the design of the studies too, Steve, if we want to really see whether drugs are providing a benefit and how much the benefit is and that sort of thing. But like, for example, with antidepressants, you're not measuring. You don't take depressed patients and give one group who are medication naive and give one group the drug and one group the placebo. These are people so often who are chronic patients. They're on antidepressants and other drugs. And what you do is you wash out one group, and that becomes your placebo group, and the other group is put back on an antidepressant. The point is, that's a design that doesn't tell you how antidepressants are effective in medication naive patients. What it tells you is you're comparing people who've been exposed to the drugs, accustomed to drugs, now they're put back on the same type of drug versus people going through a drug withdrawal process. And everybody knows this, but it never gets out into the public that this whole design is a problem to say so for example, are antidepressants effective in medication naive patients? We don't know. You haven't done those studies. There was a recent thing on antipsychotics. They said there's never been, antipsychotics came to market in 1955. A group of people from Columbia University said they couldn't find a single well-controlled, placebo-controlled trial in medication-naive patients. So we also have to look at the design of the studies. And are they designed really to assess the effectiveness, or are they designed to tell a story? That's part of the problem too. And also, we don't understand what efficacy means at all. What the FDA says is, can you provide a statistically significant benefit on some primary outcome? And that may be so small, it's clinically meaningless. They'll still get approval. So we have this whole society. You started with a societal story of what we believe, and what our societal beliefs are so out of sync with what really goes on in the testing and development of new drugs. It's just a totally different process.